I was eating my food and saw a black shadowy figure standing inside the house by the back door. This is my first time posting on Reddit, and I am also on mobile. Heard it can cause some formatting issues. I was paralyzed with a sense of impending doom and fell to the floor in fear. Furthermore, I put this experience down to being a stress-induced hallucination, as he does not believe in the paranormal at all and does not joke about things like that. I was done being the victim in this ghost story, but I needed to see it, yet I needed to face it. My dying mother promised her guardian angel would protect me. I've seen it now, and I don't think it's an angel. Then my mother died 2 months ago. It wasn't a tragedy in the sudden, shocking sense, but it was a long, slow, quiet fading, then cancer. We had years to prepare, but you're never really prepared. The last week was spent in a sterile, beige-coloured hospice room that smelled of bleach and quiet finality. I sat by her bed, holding her thin, papery hand, just watching her breath, but she was at peace with it. Then that was the strangest, most difficult part. While I was a-tingled, screaming out of grief and anticipatory loss, she was serene. On her last day, when her breathing was shallow and her voice was a dry, rustling whisper, she pulled me close. Her eyes, which had been cloudy and distant, were suddenly crystal clear. "Don't be sad, my love," she whispered, a faint, tired smile on her lips. "Yet I am not afraid, so I've never been afraid. He's always been with me." "Who, Mom?" I asked, my voice thick with tears. "My guardian," she said, her gaze shifting to a point just over my shoulder, and my protector. "He was a gift from my own mother when she passed, so he's kept me safe my whole life. He's never let any real harm come to me." I didn't know what to say. My mother had always been a little spiritual, in a vague, non-denominational way. I just assumed it was the morphine talking, a final, comforting delusion, yet I squeezed her hand. "When I go," she continued, her eyes looking back onto mine with a startling intensity, "he will pass to you. Yet he has to, and he needs someone to watch over. You will be safe now, always." "Mom, don't talk like that," I choked out. "You won't believe me at first," she said, ignoring me, her voice gaining a strange, final strength. But you'll know. Then there will be 10 marks, so 10 signs, after I am gone. When you've seen the 10th, you'll know he's with you, and then you will see him." She recited the marks to me then, her voice a low, rhythmic chant, yet a coin returned, but a silent bell, and a path cleared, then a save fall, a warning unheard, so a fear answered, so a scent of the old earth, so a touch of cold fur, so a voice not your own, then finally a gaze returned. She finished, and a deep, peaceful sigh escaped her lips, then she closed her eyes. And a few hours later, she was gone, then the funeral was a blur. The weeks that followed were a suffocating fog of grief and paperwork. I was just going through the motions, a ghost in my own life, yet I'd completely forgotten her strange, final words. They were just the ramblings of a dying woman, a final, beautiful, meaningless piece of poetry, yet then the first mark appeared. I was at the grocery store, fumbling for my keys in the parking lot, and a quarter slipped through my fingers, clattering onto the dark, wet asphalt, so it was late, raining. I looked for a minute, but it was gone, probably rolled under the car. Furthermore, I sighed, wrote it off, and drove home. When I got to my apartment and emptied my pockets onto the dresser, there it was, sitting right in the center of the pile of my keys and wallet, and a single, dry, gleaming quarter. I stared at it, then it was impossible, so my pockets had been empty. But my grieving mind immediately supplied a dozen rational explanations. Then I must have had another one. I must have picked it up without realizing it. I dismissed it, but a tiny, cold seed of unease had been planted, but a coin returned. But a week later, the second mark. Furthermore, I was walking home from work, taking my usual route past an old, decommissioned church. As I passed its silent stone bell tower, I heard it. A single, clear, resonant bun of a great bell echoing through the quiet afternoon air. Then I looked up, yet the tower was still. Then the great bell was motionless, yet no birds flew out. No one else on the street seemed to have noticed, an auditory hallucination, I told myself. Stress and grief do strange things to your mind, so a silent bell. The third mark came a few days after that. My work building is old, and the maintenance staff is constantly doing repairs. I was heading to the break room, but the hallway was blocked by a huge, wheeled cart full of tools and equipment, left there by a worker who was nowhere in sight. I sighed, annoyed, and turned to go the long way around. Furthermore, I got to the end of the hall, turned the corner, then realized I'd forgotten my wallet at my desk, and I turned back, but the hallway was empty, and the massive cart was gone. The whole process had taken less than 30 seconds. There was no way anyone could have moved it that fast. Then it had just vanished, so a path cleared, so I wasn't just uneasy anymore, yet I was starting to get scared. These could not be just coincidences, then they were too specific, too perfectly aligned with my mother's strange prophecy. I started to feel like I was a character in a story that someone else was writing. And I started to feel like I was being watched. It was a constant, low-grade, prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I'd be in my apartment, and I'd feel a sudden, intense pressure, as if someone had just walked into the room. I'd spin around, my heart pounding, but there was never anyone there, and I started seeing things too. Flickers of movement at the very edge of my vision. A shadow in a doorway that was a little too tall, a little too dark. When I turned to look, it would be gone, but mark number 4 happened a week later. I was clumsy with grief, not paying attention. I was walking down the stairs to my apartment's lobby. I missed a step, and I pitched forward. Furthermore, I remember the sickening, weightless lurch, the flash of the hard tile floor rushing up to meet me. Furthermore, I braced for the impact, for the crack of bone, but it never came. Furthermore, I just stopped, a foot from the ground, suspended in midair for a split second, as if an invisible, powerful hand had caught me by the chest. Then I was set down, gently, on my feet. I stood there, trembling, in the empty, silent stairwell, then a safe fall. The 5th and 6th marks came in quick succession, like a 1-2 punch from this invisible force that was now ordering my life. I was about to get on an elevator at a shopping mall when I felt a sudden, inexplicable wave of pure dread, a silent, internal scream telling me do not get in. I hesitated and let the doors close without me. A moment later, the lights on the floor indicator went dark, and a loud, grinding screech echoed down the elevator shaft, followed by the distant sound of the alarm bell ringing, so a warning unheard. That same evening, I was walking home through the park. A large, barking dog, off its leash, came bounding towards me, its teeth bared. I froze, a jolt of pure, primal fear shooting through me. The dog was a foot away, ready to leap, when it suddenly stopped. It let out a high-pitched, terrified yelp, tucked its tail between its legs, and fled, as if it had seen something standing right behind me. Sophie answered, yet I was 6 marks in, and my life was no longer my own. I was being guided, protected, manipulated by an unseen, unknowable force. The feeling of being watched was a certainty now. I began to see it more clearly, though never directly. In the reflection of my dark TV screen, I'd see a shape standing in the room behind me. It was tall, stooped like an old man, with arms that were too long, their hands almost touching the floor. In the reflection of a shop window as I walked by, I'd see it, a dark, hulking shape, following a few paces behind me, always keeping to the shadows. The 7th and 8th marks brought it closer from a visual presence to a physical one. I started to notice a strange smell in my apartment, a smell that would come and go without reason, and it was a heavy, musky animal scent. The smell of damp, rich earth and something else, something like wet fur, and a scent of the old earth. One night, I was lying in bed, the lights on, my nerves a raw, jangled mess. I was drifting in that grey space before sleep when I felt something brush against my outstretched hand. It was a coarse, bristly feeling, like touching a thick, wiry animal pelt. I snatched my hand back with a choked cry, my heart exploding in my chest. So I was alone in the room, yet there was nothing there, so a touch of cold fur. I was 9 marks in, and the terror was a constant companion now. Then I knew the 10th mark was coming. And I knew that with it would come the final, terrible reveal. I didn't know what I was more afraid of, the waiting, or the seeing, but the 9th mark came last night. I had finally managed to fall into a fretful, exhausted sleep. Furthermore, I was woken up but by a voice. A low, guttural, wet sound whispered directly into my ear. It wasn't a language I knew, but I felt the meaning of the sound in my bones, but it was a word that meant, mine, then a voice not your own. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner of my living room, clutching a baseball bat, watching the shadows, waiting for the dawn, and tonight, I knew it would end. The final mark, yet I sat on my couch, a TV off, all the lights in my apartment blazing. The feeling of the presence in the room was overwhelming. It was a physical pressure, a thickness in the air, then the musky, animal scent was overpowering. I could feel it, just there, in the dark hallway that led to my bedroom, then waiting, so I don't know what came over me, yet maybe it was a year of grief. Maybe it was weeks of mounting terror, and I was done being scared. Okay, I said, my voice a shaking, defiant whisper to the empty air, but I know you're here, show yourself. The air in the hallway seemed to shimmer to darken. A shape began to resolve itself out of the gloom. At first, it was the familiar, stooped silhouette of an old man. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, even with its hunched posture. Its arms were long, the gnarled, 3-jointed fingers of its hands brushing against the floorboards. Its body was covered in a thick, matted, greasy black fur, but then it lifted its head, and I saw its face, and it wasn't a man's face. It was the long, narrow, bearded head of a goat. Its horns were thick and curved, spiraling back from its narrow skull. But the worst part, the part that finally, completely, broke my mind, was its eyes. They weren't the dumb, placid eyes of a farm animal. They were a pair of intelligent, ancient, and utterly malevolent yellow eyes, the pupils horizontal slits, like a serpent's, and they were looking directly at me, but the gaze returned, yet the 10th mark. The final sign, so my mother's guardian angel, yet I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat, a solid, immovable ball of pure terror. We just stared at each other for an eternity across the 20 feet of my brightly lit living room, and in its ancient yellow eyes I saw it. The woman opened her mouth and revealed a long, crimson-red tongue, viscous liquid that looked far too much like blood, so my breath caught in my throat. My husband and I bought a new house. Turns out we were the only ones living in it. When my husband, Ryan, and I bought our first house, we were thrilled. Our 5-year-old twins, Eliza and Noah, were bursting with excitement over moving somewhere bigger, and even our 6-month-old, Joseph, seemed to share their joy, giggling and smiling in my arms. Ryan had spent the past week working on the place with his brother, unpacking furniture and setting up the bedrooms, so the move would be smoother and a bit of a surprise for us. For a split second, even I shared their happiness. At the moment the kids and I stepped inside for the second time, something shifted. The air felt heavy somehow, though the smell of pine sol and Feverol practically stuck to everything. I tried to ignore it and focused on my family instead, but it felt impossible. Yet Ryan grinned, spreading his arms, and well, yet what do you think? Eliza gasped dramatically, twirling like a ballerina. It's beautiful. Then can we have a dance floor? Noah darted past her, making a mad dash for the stairs. Yet no, then dance floor suck. Yet we need a racetrack. Ryan lunged just in time, scooping him up before his feet could even touch the stairs. Not so fast, speedster, he said with a laugh. No racing until we get settled. Eliza stuck her tongue out at Noel. Yeah, no, you just don't know how to dance. I know how to win, he shot back, wriggling free out of Ryan's arms with a grin. Their voices bounced off the ceiling that loomed high above the foyer, as they made their way toward the living room, filling the empty space. Even though the house was already full of furniture, the sound echoed longer than it should, like the walls were repeating them a beat too late. I adjusted the straps of the carriage Joseph was settled in and glanced up at the staircase. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw something move at the top landing, a shadow, maybe, or the way the light hit the banister, but when I blinked it was gone. Ryan looked over his shoulder at me, still smiling. Hey, he said, softly, are you okay? I forced a small smile, just taking it all in. He nodded, stepping closer to press a quick kiss to my temple. Told you it'd feel like home. I'll be honest, at first I was thrilled with the fact we'd be moving to a bigger home because we'd been living in the same crappy 2-bedroom apartment since Ryan and I had started dating after college. It was fine back then, but with 2 toddlers and a baby it started to feel less like a home and more like a shoebox with plumbing issues. I smiled, but my eyes drifted to the stairs again. The air up there seemed darker somehow, heavier. And even though the house looked perfect, I couldn't quite shake the feeling that it was waiting for something. Backslash I set the steaming dishes of baked ziti, the smell of garlic and cheese filling the air. Ryan poured the drinks, while the twins scrambled into their chairs, giggling and talking over each other. For a moment, everything almost felt normal, the clinking of forks, the extra noise, and the soft cooing sounds coming from Joseph in his high chair. I sat down, feeling the warmth of the food rising against my face. So I was starving. I was thinking, maybe tonight would be quiet, and maybe this house wasn't as bad as I thought. This is incredible. Jane, Ryan said around mouthfuls of pasta, tastes way better than anything we've ever cooked in our old apartment. Thanks, Rye, I replied, taking a bite out of my food across the table. Liza suddenly burst into giggles, the kind of laugh that didn't sound forced or nervous. It was bright, delighted, like she was being entertained. I smiled at her, lifting my wine glass. Then what's so funny, sweetheart? Eliza pointed past me, toward the hallway that led to the front door. But the funny man, she said between giggles. He's making faces. Ryan paused mid-bite, his fork hovering in the air. What man? Eliza stopped laughing then, her expression softening into confusion. He was right there. She pointed again, this time slower, but by the stairs. He looked funny. Noah craned his neck to look, frowning. There's no one there, Lisa. My skin prickled. I turned in my chair, glancing at the hallway, then nothing but shadows. Just the faint light from the chandelier pulling against the wall. Then Ryan cleared his throat. But Eliza, maybe you're seeing things. Then it's late. Eat your dinner. She nodded, but I noticed her shoulders stiffen as she lowered her gaze to her plate. Suddenly, Joseph started to smile and giggle at the hallway behind me, waving at something unseen. I scooped him up from his high chair, my stomach twisting. Then who are you laughing at, huh? But I asked him, half expecting an answer. His bright grin faltered, slipping away so suddenly it sent chills down my spine. He was still glancing at the hallway, barely paying attention to his mashed carrots. I forced a laugh, putting him back in his chair. I was going to cut through another bite of pasta, but the back of my neck tingled. Because for a split second before I turned away I could have sworn I saw it too, yet something tall, yet something standing just beyond the light. After dinner, I carried Joseph up to his crib in the twins' room. His tiny fingers curled around mine as Ryan gave the twins quick showers, their yawns growing as they clutched their stuffed animals. When the kids were finally tucked in bed, Ryan switched off the whole light and gave me a reassuring smile. We crawled into bed, sheets cool and soft. The baby monitor's faint hum filled the room, its small screen glowing on the nightstand. It showed a good view of Joseph's crib and the twins bunked. "Yeah," I murmured, checking the monitor one more time. "They're sound asleep." Ryan slipped an arm around my waist, pulling me close. "You did good today," he whispered, leaning his head back against the headboard. "I think this house might actually be a keeper." I leaned in closer, thinking about it for a moment, my hand on Ryan's bare chest. I let out a quiet sigh. "Ryan, I know buying this house is a huge deal for us, but—" He turned to look at me, the easy smile on his face fading. His blue eyes softened with concern, and his dark, black hair was still damp from a late night shower, so I hesitated. But what, Jane?" he asked gently, his voice low but laced with concern. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "I just can't shake the feeling that we're not alone here. Every time I step into a new room, it feels as if I'm intruding or intercepting something. I always have a sense that I'm being watched or there's something in the room with me." Ryan stayed quiet, his expression unreadable. So I went on, words tumbling out faster now. "And it's not just me, but the kids have noticed things too. At dinner, Liza said she saw a man down the hall making faces at her. She thought it was funny, but when I looked there was nothing there, and Joseph, he was giggling, staring at the same spot. I swear, for a second, I saw something move, just a dark shape." Ryan shook his head with a reassuring smile. "Jane, they're just kids. You know how wild their imaginations are, especially in a new place. And you've been stressed, so I'm sure it's nothing." "It's asterisk, not asterisk, just nothing," I said, glancing around. Suddenly, there was a cool breeze, way too cool for a warm August night, yet goosebumps prickled along my skin. I didn't want to say it, but someone had to, I think. This place might be haunted. Ryan chuckled. "Okay, Jane," he said, kissing me on my forehead. "I think it's time we go sleep. You've been on edge since we got here." "I haven't been on edge," I shot back, though what he said was true. I crossed my arms, trying to sound confident. "It's called trusting your gut feeling." Ryan smiled faintly, though there was a trace of tired affection in his eyes. "I get it. It's a new place. Everything feels different, and we're safe, okay, yet it's just the house setting, then we'll get used to it." He kissed me once more, and we both said our goodnights and went to sleep. But I couldn't close my eyes at all. Somewhere downstairs there was something dragging along the kitchen floor, scraping against the wood. I must have been the only one to hear it, because the noise came when Ryan fell asleep. I told myself that it was the house settling, but it felt like a lie. When I opened my eyes again, the room was dark. My phone screen blinked beside me, reading **3 tenum ***. Must have fallen asleep at some point in the night **. I wondered, but didn't think much of it. I closed my eyes to drift back to sleep, but they were already watery from a yawn. I picked up my phone from the nightstand and noticed I got a message that was sent at 3 on the dot by an unknown number. Furthermore, I unlocked my phone and clicked into messages. The number had the area code for Washington, which was where we were currently residing from California, so that meant this person was definitely here. Then I read the message, my eyes widening. "Yet **, you're dead. If you don't get out of our house soon, you'll never hear the end of it. Yet **, my pulse quickened. What? So I whispered to myself. I had no clue what the message meant, and whether it was a joke or not. Ryan and I were the official owners of the home now, and no one else was living in it other than us and the kids, right? As if knowing I'd just seen the message, the entity responded. Then **, I know you're reading this, Jane Wilder. Get out of our house now, or we'll make you leave. **, goosebumps covered my skin as I kept staring at the message like I was suffering from a seizure. I was completely frozen in shock and worry. At that moment, there was a shrill scream down the hall. It sounded like one of our little girls, so it wasn't Eliza's, that's for sure, so it sounded childlike and demonic and distorted. Then footsteps followed after. They came in a pair, one sounding like high heels hitting the floor, and one sounding like regular shoes slapping against the wood. They walked slowly, and I heard the twins and Joseph's room door open for a few seconds and then shut. My heart pounded as I frantically reached for the baby monitor on the nightstand. It had gotten turned off at some point in the night, which didn't normally happen. I shook it vigorously, hoping it turns on. Then the screen flickered, showing the feet of the kids sleeping. The twins were safe and sound on their bunk beds, and Joseph was asleep in his crib. It seemed like I had nothing to worry about until I noticed 3 dark figures standing in the corner, then a man, so a woman, and a little girl who looked to be about 6 years old. They dressed like it was the 1800s. The females wore long dresses. The man was wearing a brown suit with elbow patches and a fedora. The trio emerged from the corner and stood in the center of the room watching the kids sleep, and I was shaking. Their outlines were faint at first, as if the monitor was trying to fill them in, pixels struggling to keep up so they didn't look real. We were worried the second year that it might not work, an old, thought-out toe, but it went just fine. We do something every Halloween, tell me the story again. I looked up from Janet to Brian with a put-upon expression I didn't feel. Bye, you really have spoiled your daughter, you know that. He grinned back, yeah, me, so it's her favourite aunt that spoiled her. She won't go trick-or-treating without hearing this story. My brother glanced toward the dimming light coming through a nearby window. Yet I knew better hurry. It's getting dark, and if we aren't on the road soon, all the best candy will be gone. I let out a long-suffering sigh, rolling my eyes before looking down and beaming at the demanding bumblebee sitting between us on the floor with her empty jack-o'-lantern bucket. Fine, so it seems I'm being held hostage, so I'll tell you this story. When we were just a bit younger than you, I loved Halloween and your father hated it. I didn't understand why when we were smaller, but by the time I was 7 I had started to figure it out. He was always sick after Halloween, after all, and for weeks afterward he'd have a limp. The last couple of years he hadn't even wanted to go trick-or-treating with me and Dad, and by the time we got home he was already locked away in his room. Because your father and I, despite being only a year apart and loving each other very much, lived very different lives. We had separate rooms, and while we spent a lot of time together, looking back, there were also times when he wasn't around. It was like I had a good and pleasant childhood with kind, loving parents, but sometimes I was an only child. And then Brian would be back from being sick, or running away, or some other thing that I didn't understand. I always missed him, but I never thought it was that strange, as that's the way it had always been. Then, just a few weeks before my 7th and his 8th Halloween, I saw your father's feet for the first time. He always had on shoes or thick socks around me, you understand, and if he tried to take them off, he was strictly punished. I'd always thought that was weird, had asked questions about it, but our parents said it was for his protection, that he was sensitive and had delicate feet. When I caught a glimpse of them that day in September, just for a second through a neglected crack his bedroom door, I realized that his feet looked much different than mine. I had 10 toes, but most of his were gone. It worried me in a way I didn't fully understand at the time enough that I asked him about it a few days later when we had a moment alone. He told me that he lost a toe every Halloween, that we had to lose something every Halloween, give up something to the thing that haunted our family, yet to keep our family safe. Your father immediately saw how much this scared and upset me, and like always, he tried to make it better, so he told me that it was okay. He was proud to do it, so I didn't have to, so our parents didn't have to. That they always numbed up his foot good and cut it off clean. It barely hurt at all, and our parents took real good care of him. Our father was a doctor in fact, so I didn't doubt they could do it well enough. But now I knew why Brian walked wobbly and couldn't run, and why he was always so sick around Halloween. I told him that was bad, that we should stop it, but he told me no. That there was something even worse after us all, and the only way to keep it away was to give it something every year. The jack-o'-lanterns that we always carefully carved, and sat on the porch before the sun set those nights. At midnight, they had one of your father's toes in there next to the candle, but by the next morning, then it was always gone, and Brian would check, you see. He doubted if this was all real, especially when he was the one having toes cut off, and he wanted some proof that this was all really necessary. To the last couple of years, he checked the pumpkins the next morning. Other than a bit of drying blood and a burned-out candle, there was nothing left, but still, I kept pressing. Then what if our parents were crazy? Then, or if there was some other way? We were homeschooled and somewhat isolated, but we weren't stupid or completely insulated from newspapers or television. A monster stealing children's toes made no sense, but cruel. Even insane parents, and that did happen from time to time. Even now, I remember how angry and afraid I was. I loved your father more than anything, and the idea of him being hurt, I couldn't stand it. He was the only thing that stopped me from running away or calling someone for help. He said that he knew it was necessary, that our parents wouldn't do it otherwise. That they didn't act crazy or mean even when they took his toes. They acted like they felt bad about it, even told him how sorry they were and how brave and good he was for doing it. When he saw I still wasn't convinced or satisfied, he promised that this Halloween he would stay up all night and watch the porch. His room faced the front of the house, after all, so he had an ideal spot to see if anything came to take the toe. If he hadn't seen something come take it by morning, or if our parents just came back and took it back out themselves, he'd go along with whatever I wanted to do. I didn't like it, especially since it would mean him losing another toe, but I was so confused and terrified that I just felt kind of numb. I think I even blocked it out until a couple of days before Halloween, when my stomach started hurting. Furthermore, I tried to say I was sick so I didn't have to go trick-or-treating, thinking desperately that maybe if I stayed home they wouldn't take his toe, though I should have realized that up until the last couple of years they'd been doing it after we both went trick-or-treating with our father. Either way, my father knew I wasn't sick, and he made me go out with him anyway. When we got back, Brian was already locked away in his bedroom. It wasn't until 2 days later that he was well enough to come out again, and I could tell he looked pale and shaken. Whispering to him while we watched TV, I asked if he was okay. He glanced at our mother on the sofa before giving a small, brief nod. So did you see it? Did you see something come and take your toe? Your father seemed to grow paler, and I saw a slight tremble in his shoulders. After a moment of hesitation, he gave another quick nod. I could feel myself starting to shake a little by then. Gripping his arm gently, I leaned closer as I whispered more urgently. Then what was it? Was it a monster? He turned and looked at me then, and his eyes scared me more than anything I'd ever seen. He looked so scared, so lost, so desperate. Furthermore, he mouthed yes to me, and then seeming to not be satisfied, he leaned in and whispered, "Then we have to keep doing it. We can't let it in." Lips quivering and eyes shining with unshed tears, he gave me a final look and then turned back to pretending to watch television. We didn't talk about it again until the next Halloween, yet that's when they started taking his fingers. *********, as you know, your grandfather was a doctor, and both him and our mother were very clever and practical. They had set up our lives where we were isolated but respectable, where no one would question if they would long periods of time without seeing us or our parents, as your grandfather had long established himself as someone who took long sabbaticals and consulting trips to other states and countries, even if much of that time he was hidden away with us at home. This established pattern of randomness made it much easier to fly under the radar and avoid any scrutiny, as if anyone would question the rich doctor with a sterling reputation who chose to homeschool his children in this ever-darkening world. Still, their practicality wasn't all about hiding what was going on from the world. It was also about trying to find the best way to do it, so your father's toes, for instance. They only took one at a time, as that was all that was needed each Halloween, and they left the big toes on both feet, as that's what's most needed for walking and balance. It wasn't until that 9th year that they ran out of toes and moved on to fingers. The next few years they were the hardest, I think. As we got older, I grew increasingly angry and upset by what was happening, but talking to my parents about it changed nothing. They would entertain brief, polite conversations about it, but it always came back to the same thing. That it must be done, as the alternative was so much worse. Talking to Brian, I got pretty much the same response. He grew more depressed and withdrawn with each year as bits of him were cut away, but when I tried to convince him we should run away or call the cops, he'd always get very angry and serious. He'd tell me that I didn't understand and that he hoped I never would, but that we had no other choice. That as bad as it was, this was the best way of keeping the four of us safe. Something in the way he said it, the clear, pure fear I saw in his face, kept me from rebelling. I didn't know that my parents would lie to me, but I knew Brian wouldn't, and he wasn't afraid of our parents, he was afraid of what came to collect every year. He told me once that no matter how bad things seemed, that none of it really mattered. All that mattered was keeping that thing away from us, so the years crawled by. When I was 14 and your father was 15, he was down to 3 fingers on his right hand, and I had stopped complaining and questioning by then. It wasn't that I didn't believe them, I can't say what I thought was true at the time, but I come to accept that what I thought didn't matter. I was living in a world where sacrifices had to be made, yet so they would be. The next Halloween, I drugged all 3 of them the night before. Brian I tied to his bed, but our parents I rolled onto blankets and drugged down into the basement where I chained them. I'd spent the last few weeks reading up on amputation and how to keep the patient alive, so I knew how to do the tourniquet before I cut our mother's thumb off. They screamed all afternoon, both during and after. Commanding me to stop, begging me to stop, yet telling me that I didn't understand, yet that it wouldn't work. My father even offered his own finger instead of hers, and no. He needed his hands to work in case something went wrong, and the last few years, it had been her hands that were usually doing the cutting on your father. So I gagged them, and went on with what needed to be done. I carved a fresh jack-o'-lantern in the kitchen by myself, tears streaming down my face. I had the television turned up as loud as it would go, but I could still hear Brian yelling from his bedroom and our parents from beneath, yet it didn't matter.